Read the Future Conversations is providing this podcast for educational purposes only. Read the Future is a nonpartisan not-for-profit. It neither takes any position on any political issue nor endorses any candidates, political parties, or public policy proposals. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by Read the Future. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by Read the Future employees are those of the employees and do not necessarily reflect the view of Read the Future or any of its officials.
Welcome to episode 3 of Read the Future Conversations. Today we have Alison Porter. She is an advocate, a community leader. Alison, I can introduce you, but I think you would have a much better job at doing that yourself.
Yes, for the last 10 years, I've been doing a lot of activism and, focusing on politics and getting good people elected, which I believe in our democracy, getting us all to the right place eventually. But there's been some scary things lately. And more in the last few years, I've been advocating for my parents and a good friend of mine who had a stroke, so healthcare issues. And this is, obviously a later part of my life. And when I was younger, I worked my professional career. I was more in sales and marketing and somewhat in the technology space. So, but I find as I'm getting older, I really do, and I feel a lot of people are in the same space. I want to make a difference, and where I feel like I can, that's where I try to put my energy.
You mentioned a few things. I mean, it seems like you have a lot of dynamics, life-changing events here. How did you get involved in politics? You mentioned your parents and healthcare issues, but what really sort of appealed to you? Was it democracy? Was it voting, or was it the lack of your parents being engaged?
Well, actually, my parents were probably classified as activists back in the 60s when I was a child. They were my mother worked in a very poor community where she was a teacher, but I remember her helping them become a town. And, it was a Spanish-speaking community. And my father worked in downtown Phoenix with the Phoenix OIC. And so back in the 60s, my parents were doing activities to improve our society. So I think that was part of what has always kind of motivated me. I studied Buddhism and practiced Buddhism for some time. And a big part of that was and I guess became stronger my dedication towards world peace through education and sharing culture. And but because of the work that my parents did, I didn't ever see brown or black or white or and then another organization dedicated to world peace. I feel like that was definitely an advantage. And so I was always kind of coming back to democracy and how I could see, I struggled a little bit seeing some people not getting what they needed. And I became more politically active by becoming an advocate for gifted education. I was in my local school organization and then got involved in the state organization. And I remember this young mother coming to me and saying that her daughter was in kindergarten. She had a very bright daughter, kindergarten or first grade. I think maybe it was when she was in first grade. And her daughter came home and said, if they want me to act dumb, I can do that,
Okay.
that became really powerful to me. It's like, well, these children who are really bright, they can use their brilliance to make our society better, or they can use their brilliance to take things in the wrong direction. And so I think that led to a lot of my political activity.
I mean, that's a huge, I think, dynamics in terms of like really you having a breakthrough as well as you having that beautiful exposure from your youth, and then like using that going forward. I mean, like today, that isn't very common, right? We have technology interferences with people's life. There's a decay of civic engagement going on. Then like, I mean, like you being much older now, like looking back at your parents in the 60s, was it necessarily a matter of like you wanting to inspire other people to get engaged in politics? So not engaged, but like to improve their society. Or is today's democracy, like what's your opinion in today's democracy and voting? And
yeah, I think, I think so. First I was advocating very heavily, like from 2000 to 2010, for gifted children. And then I realized that I was working within an organization that wasn't really impacting the government the way that to make more significant changes. And that was when I really got a lot more politically active. I remember being asked to volunteer and going and canvassing for my congressman, who was trying to get feedback from people about the healthcare, which came to be known as Obamacare. And I remember canvassing and talking to people about their stories, about their feedback. And then I actually went to one of his fundraising events and I said, this is what people are saying to me at the door. Like, I wanted to make sure that he really knew. And that particular congressman voted the way that people wanted him to vote, and in 2010, and he was not reelected because part of his district was a district where a big part of it was where people didn't have as many issues with healthcare. And so it was sad to see him lose that opportunity to.
What year was that? By the way, you mentioned Obamacare. Was it like 2013?
No, it was 2010. I remember it really distinctly. And he lost. He did not get reelected in 2010, and that was, that was a year of a really stark awareness of the difference of what was happening. It was also the year that Citizens United passed. And I remember some of the more seasoned folks talking about Citizens United would make a big difference.
What is Citizens United? Sorry for cutting you short. Like, I mean, like what is that, and what sort of like societal improvement did it have in Arizona or in the community?
Yeah, Citizens United was a case that was heard by the Supreme Court, and may not get every single fact or detail right. I'm not going to go into the detail, but basically Citizens United had something to do with businesses or corporations giving money to candidates. And essentially I've heard it described as that was when the Supreme Court basically said a corporation is a person and gave corporations permission to give candidates as much money as they wanted. In the long term, and so again, that was 2010. It had happened shortly before that. And since then, certainly money has played a huge role in politics. So it didn't improve anything. It made a lot of things worse. I think candidates and elected officials are now more than ever, they're beholden to their big donors, which are a lot of times, corporations or corporate leaders, but Citizens United opened the door that it could be corporations. And then also, I think that impacted lobbying, but I know lobbying has been around for a long time. And I know a little bit about how it affects.
But today, there's a lot of question marks into like the security of voting. I mean, like, it sounds like you really sort of, follow the line pretty well from having to really have that affection for your parents, your friends, as well as healthcare issues. But going deeper into the whole voting and democracy topic, right? How does Citizens United really like impact voting today, or is that necessarily not a factor to really concern about? Or is technology really the biggest issue with voting? Is it the money or technology from your perspective?
Oh, no, it's absolutely technology. It's not just technology, it is the laws. I mean, here in Arizona, they're trying to pass laws. I mean, the majority of Arizonans have voted by mail, and there's a small radical faction that has accumulated a lot of power, and they want to do away with vote by mail. When the majority of Arizonans have voted for decades, voted by mail, and it's very safe and secure, and they're all of a sudden saying, "Oh, it's not, and we should stop doing that." I don't think it's. I think that is very strongly influenced in the background by money. Can you prove that? Can I give you specific examples? No, but I think it is absolutely there. I think that some of our lawmakers at the state level here are very strongly influenced by money, either in the positive way, and then some are also in the negative way. They're told that if they don't vote a certain way, by their party, then they will make sure that that a candidate has all the resources they need to run against them and make sure that they don't get reelected. And that really comes down to money in too many cases. I firmly believe in people power. I mean, money power in politics is, as an organizer, I remember learning about people power, money power, and the other third power was kind of like time, and campaigns are, there's always a limited time and a limited amount of all three resources. But a campaign that has a near unlimited source of money, they can do a lot to deal with some of the other restrictions. And the problem is there's very few people that have access to that kind of money. And that kind of money ends up making lawmakers more inclined to follow the requests of their big donors. And
Right.
I think democracy is a form of representative government. And I work very hard. I have, for the last 10 years, I work very hard for a lot of candidates, oftentimes as a volunteer. And I've met and encouraged a lot of volunteers, because if the people are electing our lawmakers, then our lawmakers are beholden to us, not to the big money.
And like over the years, you have seen that sort of dwindle more, where it's not necessarily people really representing or people being engaged. So like, I mean, if you were a senator or a representative, how would you necessarily, or even the governor, how would you necessarily sort of like inspire or what is the word, like curate societal improvement by really, would you try to like reduce technology involvement in voting and democracy, or would you necessarily want to get more technology and less money involved in the democratic process? I don't know what you're thinking about, so help me out here.
Yeah, right now we have, to me, the issues of voting is far more around people than it is about technology. And the problem, the bigger problems are some of the big problems in our society. We don't need more money to make elections secure. The 2020 election was one of the most secure elections we've ever had, despite all of the information in the media, all of the continued ongoing talking points about fraud. There is so little fraud that has been found anywhere. And it's really a shame, because people don't know that, because there are some very noisy things that happened here in Arizona. There was this audit, and for months and months, they were finding all the fraud, and they came back, and the results was, it was Donald Trump claimed that there was a lot of fraud, and he really won outright. And months and months and millions of dollars were spent on this audit that had already been performed. There had been multiple audits by professional auditors, and they found that that there was not a problem. So then this other group came in, months, millions, and what they came back with was, oh, well, Biden had, like a few hundred more votes than he did. There was no fraud. And yet many people in our society are afraid now that our elections aren't safe and that there is a lot of fraud.
So, but sorry to cut you short, but like, it sounds like the noise created the whole belief of disengagement in civics. That's kind of what I'm hearing from you here? There was a lot of noise, and that noise generated a lot of suicidal disengagement. But to really now go back deeper into the whole, so the whole voting ballot, I think, or permanent early voting, how does that imply in terms of those who are not able to be transported to the voting polls? Is there an impact there, or is that necessarily not an issue, or what is necessarily your perspective? Or I'm not sure if you're a Democrat or not, but what is your political party's really take on really trying to improve those issues societally?
Yeah, well, I am a Democrat, and but I think ever since I've been involved in politics, I have been more about getting people to vote, especially I believe that people power comes from the relationships that are built most locally. And, I have always, of course, I want more people to get elected, and they do good things for good people. And part of the way that they do that is by outreach and conversations with people, right. not by trying to analyze numbers or use technology to figure stuff out. It's, we
sounds
have
like campaigning,
yeah.
to go on campaign.
Yeah. But I think there has been our culture. I mean, look at I wasn't around, it wasn't my experience, but for many decades, there were, the movie stars are more visible, but, so Obama didn't support gay marriage when he came into office, but then he did later on. And I think part of it is when we as a society can talk about the differences that we have, we find that we do agree on most things.
What are the differences there between what you're working on and what the Republicans are working on?
Well, I think that I like what I'm working on, I believe, is protecting our democracy. I feel like when everybody doesn't have a vote, let alone an equal vote. I mean, if that isn't happening, we don't really have a democracy. The Republicans in Arizona, or a Republican in Arizona, submitted something into a bill that got passed a couple of weeks ago. And as soon as it got passed, and there were a lot of legislators on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, as soon as it got passed, it got signed by Governor Ducey, and it got brought to my attention because it has something to do with precinct committeemen, which is the most locally elected official. And that's kind of where I got started, because again, I believe that we need to be talking to each other to help solve our problems. And I always saw precinct committeemen as playing an important role in that. They changed. So this law that got signed was changing the process for a precinct committee person, and they didn't have to get signatures anymore. And their names were to be submitted to the county party chair. The Republicans had different bylaws than the Democrats. And once they kind of looked at this a little bit more closely, they realized there were some pretty big problems because of the Republicans' bylaws being different than the Democrats in what they were doing. And so now, like, Republicans and Democrats are trying to figure out how to fix it. But I looked at it and I was like, whoa, if names are being submitted to the county chair of each respective party, and they were approving the ones, that was like almost the opposite of democracy, because within the political parties in Arizona, it's the precinct committee people who become state committee members, and then they elect, so the precinct elect the county leaders, in some cases, or I don't know, there's probably a little bit of differences there, but, and then 1/3 of the PCs become state committee members. So
to really go into...
Wait, the county party chair would, by approving them, would be selecting who's going to be voting for them in the next election. That's, to me, the total opposite of democracy. So that was kind of scary. And so, but I think that was, it was some short-sighted maneuvering at the Capitol that had to do with, logistics from redistricting, but to be that short-sighted and then to implement a law, have the governor sign it and implement it with an emergency clause, I think is, part of me wants to say it's a difference in the parties, but it's not. We need elected officials who really are thinking and considering things carefully before they vote for them. So,
it sounds like today's politicians have a lot of self-interest, which it's a very, politics is a very quote unquote, I'm not really sure what politics is because I'm not in politics, but I just want to sort of clarify exactly what the differences are between the Republicans and the Democrats when it comes to voting. Prior to 2020 election, there weren't any issues.
That's not true.
No? Okay, then what am I missing here, please? I just said there weren't any issues, but there were some issues with voting. What were those issues?
What I mentioned earlier about money being in politics is, when you have a lot of money, you have access to a lot of what is called paid media, which is commercials and stuff like that. When you have people who, I'm sorry to pick on Trump, but he knew because of his previous work that saying and doing things that were outrageous meant that the news would talk about him. So they talked about him a lot, and that didn't necessarily that made people hear his name a lot. And then there were some pretty brilliant, well-paid people that promoted the kind of messaging. But that was happening before Trump. There was messaging, there's framing, like if you talk to a communication specialist, there's framing that sets off emotional triggers so that people react. And I'm not going to get into that a lot, but there was stuff that was happening that was making people feel like there's no hope. They were apathetic. They were not voting.
Understandable.
In 2010, there was a tremendous amount of turnout. President Obama was elected in 2008, and in 2010, the vote was way down, and that was by the Democrats, and a lot of Republicans got out to vote. And so there's been this back and forth for a long time, but the back and forth has definitely gotten worse in the last 10 years. It's gotten worse in more recent years. And that is significant. And it's kind of made a number of people shy away. But what happened in 2020 where, especially when, as we look back and there's more investigations done, and there have been a number of Republicans. There's a small group of Republicans that really want to retain power in this country. They do not think it's a good idea for everybody to vote. They do not think that it is.
Why is that? Don't Democrats have a similar I don't know, individuals in their own circle, or so let's sort of but because civic engagement really is not an obligation, but it's really, is it an obligation? I'm just trying to learn here, or is it a constitutional duty?
Well, I will tell you one thing. So getting involved, as I said, really involved starting in 2010. The day after the 2016 election, when Trump won and Hillary didn't, there was a huge outcry of, and I had one woman who came into the office the next day, and she said, I'm a teacher and I couldn't teach today. I was so upset, and I was talking to my principal, and he sent me home, and I just feel like I have to do something. And I heard that kind of thing over and over again. People went, I've taken our democracy for granted, and they started getting more involved civically, which I think is great. I mean, I saw that happening in 2016. In 2017, there are some moneyed interests that want to privatize education, and they do so in the name of making education better. But if we don't have public education in our country, then children get as good of an education as their parents can afford, which is not the kind of democracy that our forefathers and that many of us believe in.
And what happens when to really focus on education, but the priority really goes into voting, right? If children can go to private schools, is a private school required to teach the civic engagement portion of history? Or
Nope. Okay. Private schools can teach religion. They can teach pretty much whatever they want. They have very, very little in the way of regulations. And in Arizona, for example, we've had, charter schools have been very popular, but charter schools have completely different regulations, very, very different regulations than our public schools do. And that was one of the things that was happening. A lot of charter schools have taken advantage of the laws. There was a time when I knew investors in Arizona knew that it was a really good investment to invest in a charter school because they had different ways of making a profit and taking advantage of the laws. There's a lot of things that people took for granted that our lawmakers were doing that weren't really happening all across the country. And so I think that people really woke up. 2020 was not this big sharp turn. 2020 was this perhaps more like this intersection between people understanding we're either going to have a democracy or we're not. We're going to have corporations gain more power and a small number of people have more power and make the decisions, or we're going to come back to a democracy where we all have a voice.
Really boil it down into Alison, really what is, are you optimistic that things are gonna, because you really describe an intersection, right? You described 2020 as an intersection. Is that intersection going to be where everybody filter out the errors that were existing in your perspective, or is that intersection going to be where people decide that, okay, it's best for us to really now just take a break and really acknowledge the issues that exist in our democratic system before going forward? What's your take, and what's your take on that, and what role does voting have to play in that?
Well, as I've tried to say, I feel very strongly that for our democracy to survive and to really be a healthy democracy, people that have the right to vote need to be able to vote, and they need to. I'm sorry, I just kind of lost my train of thought for a second here. People need to have the right to vote and elect people that represent them. Some of the best Democrats I've met, I feel like they represent all of the people down at the Capitol. There's a small radical faction, a group that is more radical, and I think that came to light, for example, in the 2020 election. There were people who stood up against, which was very unusual in American history, stood up against Trump and kind of the direction that our government was moving in, but there was also people that stood up and they said, yeah, we want, and because they were being promised that things would get better, they wanted to re-elect Trump. But there was, and everybody has different perspectives, but I don't think that if you look at what happened with the COVID pandemic, there were a number of things that didn't seem to have been done based on consensus, based on looking at history, learning from things that had happened in the past, and I think it's a shame that so many people died, and that was really, really hard for a lot of us to take. And I think whatever government we have, I would like to see a humanity-based government. And I believe that this voters' rights initiative is part of us turning the corner. The fact that we went against, as a country, we went against the trend of having the president reelected, because and all of these people protesting, I think in some ways it's good. We have to talk about these things. Okay. We have to talk about the messaging, the framing that has been out there for years that government is bad.
One sort of input here to really add before we close off, right? You have really talked about a lot of really cool activities that you have done, but one also important thing is that you mentioned how Trump had a lot of publicity, but what does literacy have to do with all of this, right? Like, I mean, if we have a population that illiteracy is really a big problem, wouldn't that just really hinder voting and democracy more? So, like, just a quick analysis to really know as to what role does literacy have to do in terms of all these voting issues, democracy in peril, or is literacy, or is improving literacy one of the first steps in terms of really getting civic engagement back on track?
Well, I don't think that civic engagement, really healthy civic engagement, happens without literacy. And I do think that we've spent a number of decades moving away from literacy in this country. And that is part of why there's a number of people that when they're told their lives are going to be made better if you vote for me, they're not, if literacy hasn't played a big part in their life, then they may not be understanding the things that have happened before. They may not be, really exploring and researching some of the things that are happening now. If they get their news and information from one source that is one or two sources that are extremely biased, then that's a problem. And literacy is so valuable in terms of people being able to get more information and understand. Literacy is one of the ways that we can explore other cultures and other people. And if we don't have empathy for each other as human beings, it's really hard to have a good, healthy democracy. And we've seen that kind of thing play out in different governments around the world.
Right. I mean, it just sounds like there's a lot of, I think, turning gears in behind the scenes, and advocates like yourself that are passionate as well as committed to improving our society. As I think there should be some sort of like holiday for you guys or something like that. Advocate Day.
Yeah.
But
Well, I think literacy improves every single one of us as human beings.
But I mean, like, not to just wrap it up, Alison. Final question here. Like, I mean, do you think Arizona is in the right direction? I mean, like problems happen, adversities happen. Would you say those were the right adversities to happen to create a positive change in our community, or would you say that we shouldn't really have any adversities? What's your take on that?
Well, even before I got as involved in politics, when I was advocating for gifted students, adversities do tend to create more awareness and caring to the point of really taking action with our fellow community members. So, I mean, adversity is generally advantageous. The bottom line in the end is, can we unite as human beings and respond to this adversity? Or are we going to, what things are we going to let get in the way? And I think for the most part, human beings are breaking down the walls that separate us. And that's very challenging, in Arizona, in our country, and around the world. Right. So I think adversity, if we come together and we talk about our different experiences, and we can bring our intelligence and our creativity and our compassion to solving problems, I think, that's what puts us in the right direction. That's why I'm fighting so hard for this voting rights. It's not about one party or the other. I think
there should be like a breakfast session between Republicans and Democrats to just have breakfast with each other and talk about this voting right and democracy. Because I mean, like, Republicans can tell me the same thing, that they're fighting hard, they're trying to improve their society. You are telling me the same thing. So the question really goes back to how can people get in contact with you, and how can they really support your cause?
I just want to say one thing. I've been saying there's a lot of really wonderful Republicans, and I happen to believe more strongly in some of the Democratic values, but there's a lot of Republicans with really good values. But I think the Republican Party has been taken over by a small group, and that more and more Republicans are leaving that because they realize this isn't the Republican Party that I've known for years, and they're becoming independents or whatever. So there's also problems in our country with the two-party system. But anyway, I'm sorry. What was the question? What did you want me to say?
I mean, how to get a hold of me? I'm just saying that there should be a Republican Democrat breakfast session, but that only happens when people are able to get in contact with you and try to see how they can maybe this.
Well, I started an organization called Neighbors Forward AZ. A lot of my political work, I have not put my full effort into it yet, but I really would like to, moving forward, I would like to do a lot more community outreach in every single community. There's a lot of people doing different things, and it doesn't matter, what party or anything. It matters, how we come together as human beings. So Neighbors Forward AZ was started with a mission. Our core statement is to connect individuals and organizations who are working to improve their community. And I'm looking forward to doing, projects and
how can people get in contact? Is there an email, or is there like a phone number that we can try people to get in contact with you?
Our website is not set up, but my email address is Alison, it's one L, ALISON, at neighborsforwardaz.org. And that's the best way to get a hold of me.
Well, maybe Spider-Man can join to us. Well, he likes to be in the neighborhood. But yeah, sounds good. What? Sorry?
Would you say that again?
No, maybe like Spider-Man can join because Spider-Man neighborhood. But your friendly Spider-Man will show up. But I'm a big fan of Spider-Man. But anyways, well, Alison, thank you for coming on with the Future Conversations. It's been wonderful hearing your perspective on really the societal issues that is going on here in democracy and voting. Problems are good, right? Because they come with solutions. But I think we are all in this together. And thank you, Alison. Thank you. Any final thoughts?
I just was thinking about one thing. My parents, it wasn't until I started organizing that I realized more the difference that my parents had on me. What they were doing, made a difference for me. I encourage everybody, find a mentor, find somebody that you respect, and talk to them and work together on good projects. I think I have so much hope for humanity. I believe that we will get through this difficult time, and we can find mentors and mentors of all different kinds all the time. So let's all continue moving forward.
Perfect. Thank you. Listen, thank you a lot.
Read the Future Conversations is providing this podcast for educational purposes only. Read the Future is a nonpartisan not-for-profit. It neither takes any position on any political issue nor endorses any candidates, political parties, or public policy proposals. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by Read the Future. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by Read the Future employees are those of the employees and do not necessarily reflect the view of Read the Future or any of its officials.